I am so delighted to have this great group of people. First, I just want you to welcome the following fabulous people. David Wenger, we've got Stephen Hawkins, Leslie Bocskor, Dooma Wendschuh, Amy Jenkins, and led by our very own Troy Dayton to discuss the future of this wonderful industry. Welcome them to the stage. So here's why these fabulous people are talking to you today. David Wenger is the co-founder of Krystalize Advisory, as well as PurpleRock Cannabis Partners. Joined also is Stephen Hawkins, the fabulous and fairly new executive director of the Marijuana Policy Project. Thank you for your very hard work. And as you know, we stand on the shoulders of MPP, of which Troy is the chairman of. Incredible Leslie Bocskor, the executive chair of Electrum Partners. Thank you. Dooma Wendschuh, thank you for joining us. Again, the founder of Province Brands, one of the first people to ever tell all of us beverages are coming, cannabis beverages are here to stay, and always had a genius for those products and building one. Amy Jenkins, you are the president of the Precision Advocacy Group. Oh, is it? Sorry.
I don't think Amy's here.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Okay, very good. All right. Troy, take it away.
All right. Thanks, Gene. All right. So, crystal balling the future of cannabis, we've heard a lot over the last couple days, but fundamentally when it comes to investment, when it comes to making business decisions, it's all about playing to where the puck's going to be. So Leslie, why don't you kick it off with a few minutes on where you think this market's going and what people need to be looking out for?
Sure. So the things that I see in the immediate future are sometime in the next 3 to 25 months. I imagine that we will see the drop of federal prohibition effectively in the United States. What will that mean? Well, you look back to the creation of the internet. The internet saw a total value of publicly traded companies of under $1 billion in 1994, and by the year 2000, the total value of the top 280 publicly traded internet companies was $2.9 trillion year 2000 dollars. When you look at cannabis, hemp, and what that means on a global basis as the U.S. market, which has thousands of times the liquidity of the Canadian market, gets on board, it will be massive in the wealth creation, value creation, and money that's there. Additionally, I say that the Spanish and Portuguese-speaking world is double the size of the U.S. and Canada combined. India, again, double that nearly. So the markets that we're going to see for cannabis and hemp internationally will make what we've done here in the U.S. and Canada seem small by comparison.
Dooma. Go ahead and just give your thing, but then we can also play around if you want to disagree with anybody. That's allowed on here, by the way.
You can't disagree with Leslie, though. I mean,
I will. I'm sure Steve will.
That would be a bad idea. I'm just going to go on one very specific projection for probably the more distant future, in a way that I see cannabis disrupting the way that brands create their identity. Think of a bottle of Patron tequila, right? And imagine that bottle of Patron tequila is on the other end of a football field, so far away you can barely see it. You certainly can't read the writing, and you sure can't taste it. But you know what that is. You just see the outline of the bottle, and you understand what that brand is just from that iconic shake. Let's say that you just see the letter O, and the letter O is written in that white writing with a red background. Your brain will tell you that that letter O is part of the Coca-Cola branding because you've seen that writing so many times. Let's say that you have a blind taste test and there's an Oreo cookie and another cookie. You close your eyes, that flavor of that Oreo cookie tells you exactly what brand it is. So up until now, the ways that brands have had to differentiate themselves from each other have fallen largely into those categories. Flavor, smell, the logo, the packaging. With the advent of cannabis and the many different feelings that cannabis can create in consumers through the different strains, through isolating different phytocannabinoids and recombining them in ways that they may not exist in nature. You can create custom sensations. And I believe that there will be a future not too far from now when each brand will have their own specific formulation. So instead of a blind taste test, in the future there'll be blind feel tests. And there will be that iconic feeling associated with this brand. It doesn't matter how it tastes. It doesn't matter what packaging it's in. When you consume that cannabis product, that type of a buzz, you'll know it's from that brand. When you consume this other cannabis product, the type of sensation that it gives you, you'll know it's from that brand. And it's really easy to discount how important this is, but this is an entirely new access on which brands can create their own iconic identity and can identify themselves. And I think that's the most exciting thing that cannabis brings to life, because when you think about the other psychoactives in our world, tobacco, it always pretty much feels the same. Alcohol might taste different from a tequila to a wine, but the buzz is pretty much the same. Coffee, caffeine, different flavors, but the buzz is pretty much the same. With cannabis, that's all changing, and it's really exciting to be part of that world, pushing out those kind of beverages.
Steve?
So my crystal ball tells me that in the next 2 years we'll see 10 states, maybe as many as 15, end the prohibition for adult use and come in full legalization. We're looking at 5 states this year. States like Rhode Island that 2 months ago were not in play now are. We have states like Pennsylvania where the governor has, as you all may know, the lieutenant governor's going out and doing listening sessions. We're seeing states like South Carolina that is really warmed up now to medical use. I think we'll see the ballot initiative pass in Mississippi in 2020. So we're beginning to penetrate into the red states. But I also see as part of the crystal ball that we will continue to see arguments around creating guardrails, and fears of too high dosages. And this isn't your granddaddy's marijuana, but this is some virulent new high dosage strain. And we have to be prepared to push back on those kinds of arguments. And we're going to need the data and the science to be able to get to the kind of branding and feeling sensations that you want to see happen, because my fear is that unless we are clear in terms of pushing back on these kinds of regulatory constrictures, that are possible, we will have other problems to have to deal with.
I'd like to just say one thing to that, and because I've said this for years now, so eventually I'll be right. We're going to see the birth of self-regulation in the cannabis industry to address those various issues. It's critical, and we're going to see it in the next year.
Right.
Eventually I'll be right.
And David?
Yeah, hi, everyone. I know a lot of people in this room, but not everybody, so I just want to introduce myself for a bit. My name is David Wenger. I spent most of my career working at the largest law firm in the world, DLA Piper. We had 4,200 lawyers in 40 countries. I feel profoundly blessed to be sitting here on 2 accounts. First of all, it's an honor to be welcomed to the warm embrace of the Arcview family. I want to thank Troy and John and Chris Crane and Gene and Jay and many others that I've gotten a chance to know. I think we're all here pretty blessed to be sitting at the tip of the iceberg of an industry that's going to be transformative for modern healthcare, for wellness, for adult relaxation. I think we should all feel pretty blessed. I wrote a white paper called The Green Regulatory Arbitrage after investing in this industry for a couple of years. That's been read across the world, including in Congress, and it got me invited to join the U.S. Senate and the U.S. House cannabis working groups. So I'm in Washington, D.C. twice a month working with senior congressional staffers, writing federal legislation. And I can actually report that I just got an email today from one of those groups, and we can expect to see, and I'll kind of give 4 high-level predictions. The first one is a timeline for what the next year is going to look like. According to the email today, and it's common knowledge, I think in Q1 we're going to see banking legislation, Q1 of this year. We're also going to see DOJ protections or protection from DOJ prosecution extended to the adult use industry, so a formal enactment of the call memo. We're going to see, I think, in the second half of this year, if not sooner, protections extended to veterans, to federal employees, and I strongly believe that by Q4 this year, or maybe Q1 of next year, we're going to have some form of the States Act passed. The second point is that the other point is that when legalization, whether it's a States Act or the Marijuana Justice Act, which Senator Booker's office is going to also reintroduce on a bicameral basis in the House and the Senate in a couple of weeks. So whether it's through the Marijuana Justice Act or some form of the States Act, when legalization federally is seriously tabled, okay, we're going to see a vast array of interests coming to support it. For some perspective, those past Congress, the 115th Congress, there were more than 60 pieces of federal of legislation covering every aspect of marijuana legalization and ending prohibition. There's wording addressing every aspect of that. There's record support for cannabis legalization in many different areas of Congress. Those 60 pieces of legislation in this last Congress were more than legislation addressing cannabis in all previous Congresses combined. There are now 4 congressional cannabis co-chairs, Representatives Joyce and Lee and Young and Blumenauer, all working very hard to advance cannabis legislation. In the Senate, Senators Merkley, Booker, Wyden, Schatz, Murkowski, Warren, Gardner, each one of these offices have staffers that are very passionate, just like we all are, about moving this cause forward. And again, once legalization is seriously tabled, you're going to see people supporting research, data collection, social equity, drug testing, gun ownership, use in public housing, impairment testing. There's just going to be people interested in this from every single angle, and it's going to happen. On the Farm Bill, we all know that the hemp is no longer a drug, no longer within the purview of the DEA's authority. It's now an agricultural commodity. So that's where the FDA has stepped in. You probably have all heard 3 hard, fast guidances from the FDA: no therapeutic or disease claims, no selling it or marketing CBD or hemp, any hemp extracts as a dietary supplement, and CBD cannot be added into food products sold in interstate commerce. Okay, I have 2 messages that emerge from there. One of them is if you're adding CBD to a food product, just exercise caution, not saying not to do it, but be prepared for some form of regulatory movement there. On the other hand, at the same time that I say that, I strongly believe that the FDA is going to take an all-of-the-above approach to CBD. Commissioner Scott Gottlieb is a strong supporter of the industry. I think the FDA is going to figure out a way to make a drug path, a dietary supplement path, an OTC path, a food additive path. They recognize the potential of this industry. They're not going to curtail it in any way. And key to remember about a regulatory agency like the FDA is that it cannot become a toothless tiger. Agencies cannot put out regulations that they can't enforce. If they do that once, then they can never make regulations again. So the FDA recognizes where this industry is, and it's going to put out regulations that will keep it hopefully responsible, but at the same time recognize all the potential. The final point that I want to make is that when legalization happens, barriers that we all think of as kind of given today are going to fade away quickly. When there is federal legalization, the interstate barriers, as I see it, are going to move away quick. We're not going to have this balkanization of 50 states, islands onto themselves. All the interests, including the MSOs and a lot of other interests within the industry and big pharma and big alcohol, are all going to be pushing for this to become a regular interstate industry, and quickly it's going to go from how we see it today to a normal national industry with interstate commerce and import-export.
Awesome. Thank you. All right, David. The benefit of going last is I get to disagree. So I mostly agree with what everybody said, but I will say that I do believe that in sometime in the next 2 years we will see a practical end to federal prohibition through something like the States Act. But I think that the chances of it passing this year are not super strong. And you know, as Steve and I have spoken about. I mean, look, at Congress, it is the last body to do everything, right? I mean, they will find every reason to not do what they all already agree on, right? So I just feel like it's probably a little bit longer road. Look, I think it's possible. I just don't think it's probable. But certainly in the next 2 years, I do think that it's moving in that direction. And as far as what that means for investment and what that means for what's going to happen in this marketplace, a couple things. We're going to see more Fortune 500 companies coming into the space, probably through the hemp and CBD route, but also with really clear eyes towards cannabis itself, and then also more international. But it's going to be tough for them to get into the U.S. So that's one thing. The other is that I think you're going to see, as we get closer to the end of federal prohibition, I think you're going to start to see some really innovative deals happening. Like it's not like all of a sudden cannabis is going to be legal and then all of a sudden all these acquisitions are going to happen, right? Once they see a shot, once they see a path, they're going to get really, really creative about striking the kinds of deals that are going to trigger at the end of federal prohibition, and people are going to be, buying options on companies and things like that. It's going to be unlike anything we've ever seen before. So it's not like we're going to be able to look at other past things to be able to look at this. We're all like real pioneers right now. Like, this is something the world's never really seen before. But if you look at the impact of just the difference between last year and this year in terms of the amount of investment, it was like 3x the amount of investment. Once there's visibility into the end of federal prohibition, oh my God, it's gonna be insane. And so I think that's something we need to be thinking about in terms of when we're building businesses, which brings me to my other point, which is that if you've got a business that's growing 15%, 20% a year, and you got a decent, that's not good enough. That might look good in some other space, but one of the things we're seeing right now is the growth of the recruiting industry, right? I mean, you got Vanks just got a $10 million recruiting firm, got a $10 million investment, right? People are bringing a lot of top recruiting talent in and bringing a top people, and some of the people on this panel have been recruited out of these big companies to run other companies. And what that means is that the people that have the resources are going to really, really dominate, which means that you're going to have this bifurcation. You're already seeing this, particularly in California. A lot of it's driven by regulatory. Is you've got this bifurcation between the companies that are dominating, that have the resources and can really run and can navigate these, and then the people who just can't really keep up in the middle of a boom, right? So you actually have this interesting opportunity where you've got like distressed sales going on at the same time as you're seeing companies that are, raising at 20x their revenue at the same time, which is also something you don't tend to see as much. So there's kind of a separation right now between those who can really hack it, and a lot of times that has to do with how much capital they have and how they're using that capital to bring on talent. So those are just a couple of things. But I also feel like regardless of what happens at the federal level, we still have all the states to pass, and fundamentally all business is local and all politics is local, and that means at every city, at every state level, that hand-to-hand combat needs to still happen regardless of what happens at the federal level. And I'm also going to disagree with you on this question of interstate commerce. I think even after the States Act passes, I think we're a ways off on interstate commerce. You've got states like Florida and Massachusetts and New York where you've got very few people with an incredibly concentrated benefit, and those people who are those cultivators that are having inflated prices for products that are because they have an oligopoly, right? They're going to fight tooth and nail with the regulators and everybody else in that state to try and hold on to that to that revenue because they don't want to have to compete across state lines. They don't want to have to compete with the growers of California, I'll tell you what. And so now I do believe eventually legal challenge, there'll be something that ultimately pops that, but I think there'll be a few years where there's a lot of battles and there's a lot of states holding on for dear life for their regulatory schemes. So anyway, thoughts? Other ideas? Anybody else want to disagree or agree with any of those ideas?
Well, I can start, Troy. Okay. So I think that in states like New York, where I'm from, the main concern of the regulators is a CYA type concern. It's a new industry. They want to make sure that things go smoothly. So there is an interest in keeping the field small in terms of the amount of players in the industry. They can bring all the licensees into a room together and talk to them and make sure that nothing's going out the back door, there are no bad media stories being reported, that everything goes smoothly. So they are interested in keeping it tight. At the same time, I think everybody recognizes, and I'm on working with Bobby Paley and some others to help Governor Cuomo with some of the questions that New York State is struggling with legalization. And I think they recognize that there's just has to be a lot more players than the current amount of players that there are. So they're going to open up the industry. But I think that the license holders recognize that they are not building cultivation for the long term. I'm an early investor in some of the large MSOs like Acreage and Cresco and Forefront and some others, and I think that they recognize that cultivation assets and even processing assets in New York may not be where there's going to be a lot of long-term value, but they realize that they have the retail presence, they are first movers, they're going to just do very well there from the beginning when adult use is legalized, and there's a lot of room for other players and other products to come from other states too. So I think that'll open up.
Dooma?
I just, the thing you said that I know is I really think you're seeing the crystal ball correctly, is that these particular states, Florida, New York, that have a small number of licensed producers, they're going to have a lot of pull with the legislature and of that state, and they are going to do everything they can to protect their kingdom. I mean, you have been in this industry long enough to know that when states like Colorado and California came up to vote yes or no on recreational, a lot of the folks lobbying against recreational cannabis were the existing medical dispensaries, which is crazy when you think about it. So you could either look back in the past and see, of course, they're going to act in their own self-interest, or you could look next door to Canada, where our company is based, and see that, in fact, in Canada right now, the draft regulations for edibles and beverages were just released on the 22nd, and those draft regulations have the fingerprints of a very small number, I'd say maybe one or two, but definitely one big licensed producer all over it, right? And when Health Canada wants to have a tour to show another country, diplomats from another country, how marijuana is going, they don't have a facility, so they tour them around the facilities of these few LPs, and they develop relationships and friendships, and those LPs have the ear of the regulators. So I think absolutely we will see policy being shaped in those particular states by the few that have the licenses, and I think we will see a slow rollout into cross-border transitive states, as you said, because it doesn't benefit them. Why would they want to compete with a state where you can grow for cheaper?
Well, part of where I think the balance of power shifts is as these bigger Fortune 500 companies get into the space, and as these big LPs from Canada start to move in, and as brands start to get bigger. All those people want as much access points as possible and as much interstate as possible. So what you wind up with is a lot of these MSOs who are and the regulators are kind of the only ones who really want to hold it down. And so that'll be an interesting thing to see how that all plays out down the line. Leslie, you have some thoughts?
I'm actually going to go back to something Dooma said when he started out. He talked about how there'll be this thing where you'll be able to know a brand by how you feel. Well, what's interesting about that is I think he's right, and I think that there's another part of that is even, to me, more exciting than that, and that is cannabis and that type of development is going to change the narrative on drug development in a massive way. We're going to see personalized medicine and being able to look at how your genetic makeup is affected by certain cannabinoid, terpene, flavonoid, plant sterol makeup is going to be personalized. So some people who are affected by certain particular hybrid expressions will have a very different effect from other people because their genetic makeup has a predisposition to that. That is going to change the dialogue around drug development in a massive way. Additionally, we're already seeing how the legalization of cannabis has changed medicine to now, I mean, I said years ago, we're not going to see things about other drugs for decades to come. Well, I was wrong.
Psilocybin,
crazy. MDMA, ketamine for depression.
Yep.
It's already happening, and we don't even have the drop of prohibition on cannabis, and we're already looking at other things pushing the envelope. Kratom for dealing with the opioid crisis, etc. So we're going to continue to see changes in medicine, in pharmaceuticals, and more that are massive, and we can't even anticipate many of them at this point.
I just got to put a little spin on that, because you were talking about this amazing opportunity in drug development, which there absolutely is, but let's be honest, there's also this amazing opportunity in recreational product development. You know, people think it's so evil that the tobacco companies were trying to make, you know, more addictive products, and, you know, that is evil. You should never do that. It's terrible. But like, but you know, that doesn't mean that it's necessarily evil for companies to try to make better drugs, you know, and for recreational use. And in the case of cannabis, we're not trying to make it more addictive. We're not trying to make it kill anybody. We're trying to make a product that people enjoy more, and that is maybe able to compete with drugs that might be more harmful for them, like alcohol or tobacco. And so the same thing you're saying, these breakthroughs about your genetics, you know, we can develop 5 different versions of our beer. We make beer brewed from cannabis, and maybe if you have this genotype, you know, maybe you want to take version A, and maybe if you have this genetic makeup, you want to take version B, and that's really exciting. You know, it holds just for recreational products as it does for drugs.
Yeah, so that brings up a good point about when there's all this talk about the beverage space, and we've had a lot of talk up here. The data from BDS shows that beverages aren't all that popular right now with consumers. Curious to get everybody. I mean, I'm sure Dooma. I'm sure you think it's gonna. I think you're bullish, right? I'm curious because this is a rare instance where, you know, you've got concentrates growing at a 70% compound annual growth rate, right? But all the money's going into drinks, right? So it's kind of an interesting question. Why is that happening, and what's your prediction on when and if that the market for drinks is really going to take off?
I'm going to say something quick and short. Obesity, diabetes, the United States, and alcohol calories. To create a beverage that titrates like alcohol and works like alcohol, but doesn't have the calories, is a massive silver bullet for the beverage industry. And so that's why I think we're going to see that.
If I could just comment on that, Troy. So, one of my partners in PurpleRock Cannabis Partners and Krystalize is Harris Rabin, who was on a panel here earlier, former global VP at AB InBev. And I think that the reason why people are very interested in beverages is that consumers are used to consuming beverages in social settings and as a recreational area, mainstream consumers. So it's naturally a first entry point, a first bridge into cannabis for a lot of people that are not currently consuming. That's why I think everyone here is interested in beverages and talking about it, because we're looking for those bridges to the people who are used to consuming products in another form factor. And the fact is that beverages can be consumed in many places where you wouldn't be able to consume cannabis in many forms, such as smoking or vaping. So it is a big market. And at the same time, though, I think that for cannabis connoisseurs, which is a big part of the industry for sure, and that they're going to be looking for form factors other than beverages. So there's opportunity, but it's for a certain segment.
Yeah, I played nice. I let other people answer first.
Yeah.
But of course, I have a good answer for that. I mean, 3 legal psychoactives in our world: coffee, tobacco, alcohol. 2 of those 3 are consumed as beverages. A third, nobody does anymore. I mean, it couldn't be more obvious that beverages are how people like to consume their psychoactives. Cannabis is psychoactive, simple. As to your other point, you know, 1%, oh, it's only 1% of the market, you know, because the beverages out there suck. And like, of course nobody's buying them, you know? And look, put yourself back in time now and imagine it's like 1940, and you walk in this warehouse, there's this guy, Alan Turing, and he's like, hey guys, I've invented the computer, it's amazing. And, you know, you're a smart 1940s era guy. You look around, you see that it's huge. It takes a whole warehouse. They got a power substation out the back to power the thing, and you're like, this is never going to take off. Maybe one or two governments are going to buy it, but no one's going to want one of these things. And now we all have one in our watch and one in our phones, So, I mean, the beverages have to overcome the problem of onset time. It takes an hour to feel the effect. That takes a lot of chemistry to solve that. Some people have done it. Some people in this room, sitting right there, have done it. The beverages are going to keep you high for 6 hours. That's crazy, You might want to drive home before 6 hours are up. That takes a lot of chemistry. We're working on solving that problem at Province Brands. We have a lot of scientists working on it. The beverages give you a feeling that's not quite the same type of high that you get when you smoke marijuana, no matter what strain it is, and it's not the same type of high you get when you drink alcohol. It's somewhere, it's kind of weird. Someone has to figure out how to tame that high and make it a high that people want. So there's a lot of science and work that needs to go into making great beverages, and when it's done, it will be as ubiquitous as that computer is today.
Mm-hmm. All right. So Steve, you touched on this a little bit in your opening about some of the states that are on the horizon. Wonder if you could share a little bit some predictions about the next year or two, and what do you see happening at the state level? Not just which states are going to pass, but any other innovations or forward progress or things we got to be watching out for in terms of what the actual legislation will actually look like as we gain public opinion.
Yeah, so I think that what we're seeing and related to some of this discussion are, advocacy groups like AAA wanting to be involved in the discussion, and and questions that continue around how will we be able to control for driving with impairment. So in some of these ways that we're looking at the chemistry, that could help to answer some of the questions around safety, right? How can we, if you know what kind of high you can get from understanding how it connects with your body chemistry, that could begin to answer questions that are still out there, right? Because part of the pushback is, well, how can we control for this product? It's more potent now, and that I think is part of the pushback that we're going to see in a number of states, and we got to begin to be able to answer that question.
And who are some of the new allies and things like that, people that we're reaching out to, maybe we haven't reached out to before, or like what are some new coalitions or people we got to be watching out for as this thing gets big? And you probably have
if I can comment on that, I think that one group that doesn't immediately come to mind is gun owners, and it's many times right-wing leaning group, but in the Senate Cannabis Working Group, there's discussion about getting a whole group of Republican senators just on that particular issue, because right now gun owners have to certify every year that they don't use any illegal drugs, and if they're a medical cannabis patient, they're committing a felony every year by recertifying that they don't use any medical cannabis drugs. One more thing I wanted to add on the state's point is that we talked about licensing and the number of licenses and whether it's going to open up in limited states like New York. One trend that to keep an eye on is states that don't have unrestricted licenses and don't have very limited licenses, but maybe are somewhere in the middle. States like Nevada, Maryland, some others. In those states, they might keep the number of licenses they have for a long time. So it might be actually harder to get a new license in some states that now are somewhat less restricted than it might be in a very restricted state going forward.
Yeah, great. Steve, do you want to share more about what's happening at the state level as well?
Well, I think that as we see Illinois and Connecticut and New York and New Jersey, and I think Rhode Island this year pass, be interesting to see what some of the forces are that shape the law, like in New York, where you've had these 10 vertical licenses and where the governor's bill is far different, right? And the challenge is how much will industry really be able, the existing ROs, how much they will be able to actually shape what that legislation looks like will be something that we should pay attention to. And we're also seeing, of course, the concerns that will continue to be raised around what kind of equity flows out of these bills. I am for effective public policy, with the underline being effective, right? So I think we still have to figure out the right models around equity that will actually work, and there's a role, I think, that can bring together some of the social justice advocates in this space with some of the business leaders, but it cannot be done in the course of the battle around legislation. It has to come off of that field, and those conversations have to take place somewhere else, and models created that then can inform future legislation.
Absolutely. Yeah, and one thing I would add to that is, you know, one prediction I would make from a regulatory standpoint is I think that the environmental aspect of this and sustainability is going to become more and more important, particularly as we need more allies, you know, in each of these states and federally. And I think that has some big implications from a business standpoint downstream, right? So anybody that's developing stuff for indoor cultivation, or people that are selling, you know, warehouses and things like that, especially as people shift their attention to you know, plant flower products and into more you know, products that are derivative, lest you have a need for this like absolutely precision bud that's grown indoors. And the more we can get this plant outside where it belongs, and that has to do with the regulations and how we create regulations around making it reasonable for people to be outside with their cannabis. Also, you know, in getting ready for the potential of interstate commerce, we can start growing things in the places where you grow things, which is where it's sunny, where, you know, and so that's going to help environmentally, right? And so I think all of those things, when you look at the need for sustainability, that all the way goes down into product development and everything else. If you're developing a product that's only used in indoor cultivation, right? What we need to be looking at is things that really make the sun more useful, things that can be utilized outdoors, as well as new ways of dealing with pests and things like that. In sort of the ag tech boom is another area where I think things are going. And so when you look at sustainability, I think there's a lot of opportunity sitting in that realm from a business standpoint, where you also have an output that is something positive. Real quick, 10 seconds. If everybody's got one last prediction they want to make, let's go. Boom, 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 boom. Like
yeah, I'll start. We're going to see less of panels like this. More women, more minorities, and we're going to see the UN finally adopt sensible policy around cannabis, and the World Health Organization's advice is going to lead to the internationalization of hemp and cannabis.
Very simply, I predict that no fewer than 8 foreign countries will legalize marijuana for recreational purposes before the United States does. Sorry.
I predict that we will see a red state come out from nowhere, and if I had to guess, I would put my money on Kentucky.
There's some policies that at certain points in time seem like they make a lot of sense to a lot of people, like slavery and women not being able to vote, and gay people not being able to get married. But once there's advances in thinking on those policies, it seems crazy how rational people ever thought that that was a good idea. And I think at some point in the not too distant future, that's what we're going to think about cannabis prohibition.
Perfect thing to end on. Thank you guys so much. Good luck.